The morning had begun like any other in the grand mansion at the edge of the city. Sunlight spilled across the polished floors, reflecting off crystal chandeliers and gilded furniture. The staff moved quietly, each attending to their own tasks with practiced precision. The young maid, who had been with the family for several years, went about her chores without drawing attention. She swept the floors, dusted the furniture, and organized the countless rooms with a calm efficiency. Despite the beauty and order of the house, there was a quiet loneliness about her life. She worked long hours and often felt invisible. Yet she carried out her duties faithfully, taking pride in the small ways she could help the household run smoothly. It was during this ordinary morning that the first signs of chaos appeared. A loud, piercing sound shattered the calm, the wail of sirens growing louder by the second. The maid froze, her broom in midair, as the sounds of heavy boots echoed through the driveway. She turned to see police vehicles pulling up in front of the mansion. Men in uniforms poured out, their faces serious, their movements swift. At their sides, several police dogs growled softly, their noses to the ground, sniffing the air as if searching for invisible clues. Panic gripped the maid. She had no idea why this was happening. She ran to the nearest window and saw officers moving with precision, setting up barriers and directing neighbors to stay back. The normally quiet street was now filled with flashing lights, barking dogs, and the murmurs of shocked onlookers. The maid's heart raced. Questions swirled in her mind. Was this about the family she worked for? Was she somehow involved? She had done nothing wrong, yet fear tightened around her chest. The officers approached the mansion doors, their presence commanding and unyielding. One of them called out for everyone inside to stay calm and remain where they were. The family appeared from the living area, confusion and concern written across their faces. The maid noticed the worry in their eyes, and it mirrored her own. She wanted to explain herself, to say that she had done nothing. But the words caught in her throat. The police began asking questions. They moved room by room, their dogs leading the way. Every step they took seemed to make the house smaller, the walls closing in. The maid was asked to remain in the main hall, standing apart from the family. Her hands trembled as she tried to steady her breathing. She could hear the barking dogs, the shuffle of feet, and the sharp commands of officers. It was all overwhelming. Neighbors had gathered outside, watching from behind fences and across the street. Whispers spread quickly, speculation growing with every moment. The maid could hear bits of conversation, rumors about stolen items, missing evidence, or even illegal activity. None of it made sense to her, but she felt the weight of judgment pressing down. She had always been quiet and diligent, never drawing attention, yet now, all eyes, even if only from a distance, seemed to be upon her. Officers approached her. One of them, a stern man with a clipboard, began asking questions about her presence in different parts of the mansion. She answered as truthfully as she could, her voice shaking despite her attempts to remain composed. Her answers seemed to irritate him, as if her nervousness alone was proof of guilt. The police dogs circled closer, their noses twitching, their instincts reacting to the tension in the air. Each sniff, each bark, made her feel more exposed, more vulnerable. The family tried to intervene, speaking up on her behalf. They explained her loyalty, the years she had served, and her character. But the officers were methodical, and their minds were fixed on the search and the protocol they were following. The maid watched helplessly as the very people she had dedicated her life to serving seemed unable to shield her from suspicion. She wanted to scream, to beg for understanding. But she knew that any sudden movement or emotional outburst could be misinterpreted. As the morning dragged on, the pressure on the maid increased. She was moved to a side room, isolated from the family. Here, the officers asked more pointed questions, pressing for answers. She was asked to recount her every action over the past days, to remember details she hadn't thought about in weeks. Each question felt heavier than the last. The police dogs lay at the edge of the room, alert and restless, sensing her anxiety. She could almost feel their gaze, piercing and demanding, as if they knew she was hiding something. Alone in the room, the maid's thoughts raced. She tried to recall every detail, every small movement, every conversation. Fear mingled with frustration. How could she prove her innocence when the world seemed determined to see her as guilty. Memories of her quiet sacrifices for the family flashed before her eyes, the nights she stayed late cleaning, the meals she prepared in silence, the small comforts she offered to children she had grown to care for. None of that seemed to matter in the face of suspicion and fear. Outside, the mansion was a flurry of activity. Officers moved with efficiency, checking every corner, every drawer, every hidden space. The police dogs led them to areas that seemed ordinary to any other visitor, but held significance in the search. Each discovery, or lack thereof, seemed to escalate the tension. The maid knew that her fate, and perhaps that of the family, hung in the balance. She felt trapped, caught between the authority of the police and the scrutiny of the world outside. Hours passed. The maid remained under observation, her nerves stretched thin. She could hear the faint murmurs of the family, the officers' discussions, and the occasional bark from the dogs. Each sound was a reminder of the precarious situation she was in. Yet amid the fear, a small ember of resolve began to burn within her. She realized that fear alone would not save her or reveal the truth. If she wanted to survive this ordeal and protect the family, she would need to be brave. To speak when the time was right, despite the overwhelming stress, the maid tried to remain composed. She straightened her back, wiped her hands on her apron, and forced herself to breathe evenly. She remembered the lessons of her life: patience, observation, and calm in the face of adversity. Even as the police dogs circled and the officers questioned her relentlessly, she began to form a plan in her mind. She would wait for the right moment, gather her thoughts, and tell the truth. Not just for herself, but for the family she had served faithfully. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. The maid, once invisible and unnoticed, had become the center of an intense investigation. Every gesture, every word, every breath was watched and analyzed. Yet beneath the fear and pressure, she felt a quiet determination growing. She had faced hardships before, and though this situation was unlike any she had encountered, she knew that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. As the morning faded into early afternoon, the police showed no signs of slowing. The dogs remained alert, sniffing, listening, and reacting to the environment. The officers moved methodically, following protocols that seemed unyielding and rigid. The maid understood that patience and honesty would be her only allies. She waited, tense but resolute, knowing that sooner or later the truth would have to be spoken. And when that moment came, she would be ready to reveal what she knew, no matter the risk. Through the chaos, the family watched with a mix of fear and helplessness. They wanted to intervene to protect the maid, but the situation left them powerless. They observed her silently, hoping that her courage and integrity would be recognized before any irreversible actions were taken. The maid, aware of their concern, drew strength from it. She realized that she was not entirely alone. Her loyalty and bravery had allies in the people she cared for. Even if the world seemed poised against her, the scene in the mansion was one of tension, fear, and uncertainty. The police dogs prowled, officers questioned, and neighbors whispered. The young maid, once a quiet figure in the background of a wealthy household, had become the focal point of a dramatic and frightening turn of events. Despite the fear, she held on to a quiet strength, understanding that the truth was her most powerful tool. She waited, her mind preparing for the moment when she would speak, when the world would hear her story, and when justice might finally prevail. The tension in the mansion did not ease as the day went on. The maid sat quietly in the small side room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The officers came in and out, asking questions, taking notes, and checking their devices. The police dogs were restless, pacing near the doorway, alert to every sound. Each bark, each shuffle of a foot, sent a wave of anxiety through her body. She knew they were trained to detect things she could not even see, and she felt completely exposed under their watchful eyes. She tried to focus on her breathing, counting slowly to calm herself, but it was hard to think clearly. The officers asked her the same questions again and again, probing for details she could not always remember. They wanted timelines. They wanted explanations for where she had been, what she had done, what she had seen. She answered honestly, even when she was unsure, but her hesitation seemed to make the officers suspicious. Each pause, each nervous glance seemed to deepen their doubts. The maid felt a heavy weight on her chest, a feeling that she could not explain, and that made it hard to speak. The family tried to reassure her from the other room. They called out gently, asking if she was all right, telling her that they trusted her. The maid appreciated the support, but she felt trapped. Being isolated from the people she trusted added to her fear. She wanted to step out, to explain everything, but the officers were strict and careful, making it clear that no one was allowed to leave or interfere with the investigation. She realized that if she wanted the truth to be known, she would have to speak for herself, in the right way, at the right time. Hours dragged slowly. The mansion, usually a place of comfort and order, had turned into a confusing maze of suspicion and authority. Officers moved purposefully from room to room, sometimes bringing the dogs with them. The dogs sniffed everything: drawers, cabinets, even the smallest corners. The maid felt their presence everywhere, like invisible eyes watching her every move. She tried to remain calm, but she could feel her nerves fraying with every passing moment. Her hands shook slightly as she tried to focus on anything other. Then the tension around her. She remembered why she had started working in this house. She had come seeking stability, a way to support herself and her family, and she had found a place where she could contribute quietly. She had grown attached to the household, caring for its members with dedication. Now, all of that felt fragile, as if one misunderstanding could destroy everything she had built. The thought made her chest tighten and her stomach churn. She could feel the eyes of the officers and the presence of the dogs as a constant pressure that left her feeling small and powerless. The officers took a break briefly. Stepping out into the hallway to discuss their next steps, the maid sat quietly, listening to the faint sounds of their conversation. She tried to piece together what they knew, what they suspected, and how she might be able to explain herself. She thought about the family and how much she wanted to protect them. If she remained silent, she feared that someone else might take the blame. Someone innocent could get hurt, and she could never forgive herself for not speaking up. At the same time, she worried that revealing too much too soon could make things worse. She had to find the right balance. As the afternoon wore on, the officers returned and began a more detailed questioning. They asked her about specific incidents, her routines, and her interactions with others. The maid tried to remember every detail, recounting what she had seen, what she had done, and what she knew. Each answer she gave seemed to lead to more questions. The officers listened carefully, their expressions unreadable. While the police dogs shifted restlessly, alert to any hidden scent or trace of evidence, the maid felt as though every word she spoke was being weighed, every movement analyzed. She remembered moments from her life in the mansion, the quiet mornings she spent arranging flowers, the nights she stayed late cleaning, the small comforts she provided for the children and the family. Those memories brought her some comfort, reminding her that she had acted with care and integrity. She realized that her actions, though unnoticed by many, had always been guided by honesty. Now honesty would be her only defense. The family grew increasingly anxious as they watched from the living room. They wanted to protect her, to shield her from the intense scrutiny, but they were careful not to interfere. They whispered words of encouragement, urging her to stay calm and to trust that the truth would be revealed. Their support gave her a small measure of strength. She knew that she was not completely alone, and that realization gave her the courage to continue answering the questions. Even when they were difficult, time seemed to stretch endlessly. With officers coming in and out, questioning, noting, and observing, the maid felt exhausted, but she could not afford to stop. She knew that the investigation could last for hours, or even longer, and that she needed to remain alert and focused. Her mind raced with strategies for how to explain herself clearly, how to convey her innocence, and how to protect the family she cared for deeply. She thought about the consequences of silence and realized that she could no longer stay quiet, A sudden bark from one of the police dogs broke her concentration. The dog had detected something unusual, sniffing near a corner of the room where she had been sitting. The officer leading the dog approached her, asked a question that made her heart pound. Had she seen or handled anything unusual? The maid's mind raced, remembering the days leading up to this moment. She thought carefully before answering, knowing that honesty was the only way forward. She spoke slowly and clearly, recounting small details that she had noticed. Trying to explain her perspective without adding confusion, the officer listened intently, his expression unreadable. The police dog remained alert, but no aggressive behavior followed. The maid felt a flicker of hope. Realizing that her careful honesty might begin to shift the investigation in the right direction, she continued, recounting her observations and actions, carefully avoiding speculation or exaggeration. Her voice gained strength with each word. She realized that telling the truth was the most powerful thing she could do. Despite the fear and the constant pressure, the maid felt a small sense of control returning. By speaking clearly and honestly, she was taking steps to protect herself and the family. She saw the family's subtle nods from the living room, their eyes filled with encouragement and trust. That support reminded her why she had come this far and why she had to continue. She could feel the tension in her body slowly easing, placed with determination. As evening approached, the officers began to consider new leads based on her statements. The police dogs, once restless and intimidating, seemed to acknowledge her cooperation. The atmosphere shifted slightly with a sense of cautious observation rather than immediate suspicion. The maid realized that her courage and honesty were beginning to make a difference. She felt a small relief, knowing that she had taken the first important steps toward revealing the truth. The maid remained in the side room, reflecting on the day. She thought about the power of patience, the importance of staying calm, and the courage it took to face fear directly. She knew that more challenges would come, but she felt ready to face them. Her loyalty to the family, her integrity, and her careful honesty had already begun to influence the course of events. She realized that, even in the most frightening situations, a clear mind and a brave heart could make a difference. The evening shadows fell across the mansion. Softening the harsh lights of the investigation, the officers continued their work, but the maid's presence no longer seemed like a threat. She had answered questions, provided insights, and shown the strength of her character. The family watched quietly, grateful and proud of her resilience. The police dogs, ever vigilant, moved calmly around the house, no longer signaling immediate danger. The maid understood that the journey was far from over, but she had taken an important step. She had begun to reveal her truth, and with it, the path to justice and clarity had started to open. The maid sat quietly in the side room, the events of the day weighing heavily on her mind. She had answered question after question, recounted every detail she could remember, and yet she felt that the tension in the mansion had not fully eased. The officers moved with precision, following their protocols, but she could sense a subtle shift. They were listening more intently now, their suspicion tempered by the careful way she spoke. The police dogs, once restless and alert to every move, seemed calmer, their noses still active but no longer aggressive. The maid understood that the right moment to speak the full truth was approaching. She needed to be ready. Her thoughts drifted to the days leading up to this incident. She remembered noticing unusual activity outside the household. Strange visitors and quiet exchanges that seemed out of place. She had kept her observations to herself at first, worried that revealing them too soon might cause trouble or put someone at risk. But now, under the scrutiny of the police, she realized that hiding what she knew was no longer an option. The family she served faithfully depended on her honesty to clear the confusion and protect everyone involved. She took a deep breath, steadying her hands and calming the rapid beat of her heart. She knew that fear could cloud her words, make her hesitant or uncertain, but clarity and courage could turn the tide. Slowly, she began to gather her thoughts, organizing the sequence of events in her mind, preparing to explain everything in the calmest, clearest way possible. This was her chance to shift the investigation, to move from suspicion to understanding. The officers returned after a short discussion among themselves. Their tone was sharper now, more direct. They asked her again about the unusual items and visitors she might have seen. She paused, thinking carefully. Every word had to be precise. She began recounting the subtle signs she had noticed, the late-night deliveries that seemed suspicious, the faces of strangers who lingered too long, the unusual conversations she overheard while performing her duties. Her voice, steady and clear, captured the attention of everyone in the room. The officer in charge, a man with years of experience, leaned forward, his eyes fixed on her. He asked her if she had touched or moved anything out of place. The maid nodded, admitting that she had once moved a small envelope, intending only to keep it safe until she could understand what it contained. She explained that her actions were guided by concern for the family, not by any desire to hide evidence or obstruct justice. Each explanation she gave seemed to cause the officer to rethink his assumptions. He wrote down notes quickly, and even the police dogs, sensitive to human emotions, appeared to respond to the change in the room's energy. The maid's revelation was slow but deliberate. She described each moment with care, making sure her story was consistent and clear. She avoided speculation, focusing only on facts she had observed. She spoke of her intent to protect the family, her fear of exposing them to harm, and the reasons why she had kept quiet initially. Her honesty began to reshape the investigation. The officers discussed among themselves, occasionally nodding or exchanging looks that suggested they were beginning to understand the situation from her perspective. Outside the room, the family listened, holding their breath. They had trusted her all along, but witnessing the process was stressful. Each time she explained something new, a wave of relief washed over them, tempered by lingering concern. The maid noticed their quiet support, and it gave her strength. She realized that she was not facing this challenge alone. Her loyalty and bravery were not just for herself, but for the family that had welcomed her into their home, who had depended on her for years. The police dogs remained vigilant, moving slowly around the room, sniffing and pausing at points of interest. Their behavior suggested they were picking up on the subtle changes in scent and atmosphere. The maid understood that even the animals could sense the honesty in her tone, the calmness in her movements. Each careful step she took, each word she spoke, reinforced her credibility. She began to feel a cautious hope that the truth would soon emerge. Hours passed, and the officers pieced together the new information she provided. They retraced her steps, examining the places she mentioned and comparing her observations with evidence from outside sources. The tension in the mansion shifted slightly. The focus moved from the maid as a potential suspect to the broader context of unusual activity that had led to the investigation. The maid's careful honesty and courage were changing the course of events, and she could feel it. The maid reflected on the lessons she had learned from her life. Patience, observation, and integrity were qualities that had guided her, even in the smallest moments of her daily work. Now, those same qualities were helping her navigate a situation far more complex and dangerous than anything she had faced before. She felt a quiet pride in the way she handled herself, despite the fear that had gripped her earlier in the day. She realized that courage did not mean the absence of fear, but the decision to act with honesty and intention despite it. As evening approached, the officers made a breakthrough. Evidence they had previously overlooked now made sense in light of the maid's revelations. They found connections between the suspicious activity she had described and a network of external individuals who had attempted to manipulate events in the household. The focus of the investigation shifted dramatically. The officers began asking questions about these external parties, their tone now more investigative than accusatory toward the maid. She felt a sense of relief, knowing that her truth was guiding the officers closer to understanding the real situation. The family, who had been watching silently, felt their anxiety begin to lift. They approached her gently, offering quiet words of encouragement and reassurance. The maid appreciated their support, but remained focused on providing the officers with complete clarity. She knew that one misstep could still complicate matters. Her careful, precise recounting of events continued, step by step, ensuring that nothing was left misunderstood or misinterpreted. The police dogs, trained to detect anomalies and sense tension, moved more calmly now. Their behavior reflected the change in atmosphere. As the room shifted from suspicion and fear to careful examination and understanding, the maid realized that her persistence and honesty had started to influence not only the officers but also the environment around her. The tension that had once felt unbearable was easing, replaced by a sense of cautious progress. Throughout the evening, the maid continued to provide detailed information, each fact adding clarity to the unfolding story. She described her observations, the choices she had made, and her reasons for protecting the family in the way she had. Her voice remained steady, her demeanor composed, and her honesty evident. The officers began to recognize the courage it took for her to speak so openly under such intense pressure. Each word she spoke helped to reconstruct the events accurately, leading to a growing sense of resolution. By the end of the day, the maid could feel a shift in the energy of the mansion. The police presence remained, but the focus was no longer solely on her. The officers had started connecting the dots. Understanding the full picture, thanks to her careful and deliberate revelations, the family's gratitude was palpable, though unspoken, and the maid felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had faced fear head-on, spoken the truth with courage, and begun to change the direction of the investigation. The evening settled over the mansion, casting soft shadows across the rooms that had been filled with tension and uncertainty all day. The maid sat quietly, reflecting on the day's events and the strength she had discovered within herself. She understood that the journey was far from over, but she had taken the most important steps. She had remained honest, calm, and brave. She had begun to reveal the truth, and with it, the possibility of justice and clarity started to take shape. The night had settled over the mansion, but the atmosphere remained charged with tension. The officers continued their work, reviewing the statements the maid had provided and comparing them with the evidence they had collected. The police dogs, once the source of her constant anxiety, now moved more calmly, sniffing around without the aggression they had shown earlier. The maid felt a quiet relief, knowing that her honesty was beginning to influence the investigation. She could sense that the truth was finally starting to emerge. It filled her with both hope and cautious anticipation. The maid reflected on the events that had led her to this moment. She remembered the subtle signs she had noticed weeks ago: strangers visiting at odd hours, unexplained packages, and conversations that seemed out of place. She had kept these observations to herself at first, worried about causing unnecessary trouble, but now she understood that withholding them had created more confusion. She realized that her careful observations, once shared, were helping the police piece together the puzzle. Each small detail she had remembered was now proving to be an important clue. The officers called her back into the main living area. They asked her to walk them through the events one more time from her perspective. She spoke clearly, recounting everything she had seen, heard, and done, making sure not to leave anything out. She explained her reasons for temporarily moving certain items to keep them safe, and how she had tried to protect the family from potential harm. Her voice was calm and steady, and the sincerity in her tone was undeniable. The officers listened attentively, nodding and taking notes, their suspicion of her fading with every word as she spoke. The family watched quietly from the side. Their eyes were filled with gratitude and relief. They had always trusted her, but now the truth was being recognized publicly. The maid felt a surge of pride, not for herself, but for having been able to protect them and help reveal the reality of the situation. The fear that had gripped her earlier in the day began to lift, replaced with a sense of purpose and determination. The police dogs, sensitive to the environment, seemed to react to the change as well. They no longer circled aggressively, and their barking had stopped. The officers began to focus on the areas the maid had mentioned, searching for evidence that corroborated her story. Each discovery matched the details she had provided, reinforcing her credibility. The tension in the mansion shifted from suspicion to investigation. As the focus moved toward uncovering the true culprits and understanding the broader context of the events, the maid explained how she had come across certain documents and packages that indicated external interference in the household. She had moved them carefully, intending to protect the family and to prevent them from falling into the wrong hands. Her honesty about her actions helped the officers understand that her intentions were never malicious. The family, listening silently, felt a deep sense of gratitude. They knew how much courage it had taken for her to speak openly under such pressure. The officers began connecting the dots. The evidence the maid had preserved led them to uncover a network of people who had been attempting to manipulate events and create confusion in the household. The investigation expanded, with the focus shifting to these external parties. The maid's bravery had redirected the course of the inquiry, allowing the police to target the real culprits. Her careful and honest testimony had become the foundation of a new understanding, one that would ultimately lead to justice. Context whenever needed. Her steady demeanor reassured the officers and the family alike. Each explanation she offered helped to dismantle the web of suspicion that had surrounded her earlier. The officers began to see her not as a suspect, but as a crucial witness whose observations were vital to resolving the case. The family approached her quietly, expressing their silent gratitude. Their presence reminded her of why she had endured the fear and uncertainty. She had acted out of loyalty and care, and now those qualities were being recognized. The maid felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her actions had not only protected the family, but had also guided the police toward the truth. The investigation continued into the early hours of the morning. The officers used the information she had provided to track down the external parties involved. Each new discovery reinforced her testimony, validating her careful observations and honesty. The police dogs, once a source of fear, moved confidently, signaling that the situation was now under control. The mansion, which had felt like a place of confinement and tension, began to feel lighter, filled with a cautious sense of relief. The maid thought about the courage it had taken to speak up. She realized that facing fear head-on and choosing honesty over silence had been the right decision. Her actions had not only cleared her name, but had also protected the family and contributed to the resolution of a larger issue. She felt a quiet pride in her ability to remain calm and truthful under pressure, knowing that integrity was her most powerful tool as dawn approached. The officers gathered their findings and began preparing a report. The maid provided the final clarifications, ensuring that every detail was accurate. The family, exhausted but relieved, watched as the situation began to stabilize. They knew that the ordeal was coming to an end, thanks to the maid's courage and dedication. The police dogs, now calm and obedient, moved around the mansion one last time before being called back. Their behavior reflected the change in the atmosphere, signaling that the immediate tension had dissipated. The maid took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past hours lift from her shoulders. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and suspicion, and had emerged with her integrity intact. The family gathered around her, expressing their appreciation in quiet, heartfelt ways. Their gratitude was evident in their eyes and gestures. The maid felt a sense of belonging and recognition she had rarely experienced. She had always worked diligently behind the scenes, and now her loyalty and honesty were finally acknowledged. The mansion, once a place of tension and fear, felt more like home again. Filled with relief and a renewed sense of trust, the maid reflected on the lessons of the night. She understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Her careful observations, her loyalty to the family, and her decision to speak the truth had changed the course of events. She had faced the pressure of suspicion and emerged stronger, more confident, and more aware of her own resilience. The night slowly gave way to morning light. The officers prepared to leave, satisfied with the progress of the investigation and the clarity provided by the maid's testimony. The family, exhausted but relieved, began to return to their normal routine. Grateful for the protection and honesty the maid had shown, the maid herself felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, knowing that her actions had not only safeguarded the family, but had also contributed to justice being served as the sun rose. The mansion felt calm and safe once again. The maid took a moment to breathe, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and intense pressure, yet she had remained steadfast and honest. Her courage had shifted the direction of the investigation, leading to the truth and protecting those she cared about. She realized that even in the most challenging circumstances, integrity, calmness, and courage could make a profound difference. The night's ordeal had tested her in ways she had never imagined, but she had emerged stronger, and the family she served knew that their trust and loyalty had been well placed. The morning after the long night arrived quietly. With soft sunlight streaming through the tall windows of the mansion, the maid sat in the kitchen, sipping a warm cup of tea, feeling the first sense of calm she had experienced in hours. The police had completed their investigation, and the officers were preparing to leave. The atmosphere in the house had shifted completely from one of tension and suspicion to one of relief and gratitude. The family gathered around her, their expressions soft and thankful. It's no longer shadowed by fear or confusion. The maid reflected on what had happened over the past day and night. She had faced fear and pressure like never before, yet she had remained truthful and composed. Her honesty had not only protected her, but had cleared the family's name and led the authorities to the real culprits outside the household. Every detail she had recalled, every careful action she had taken, had contributed to revealing the truth. She realized that her courage had not gone unnoticed. And though she had not sought recognition, the sense of fulfillment was profound. The family expressed their gratitude in quiet words, gentle smiles, and gestures that conveyed more than mere thanks. The children, who had watched her anxiously during the ordeal, now hugged her tightly, showing their relief and affection. The parents looked at her with renewed respect, understanding fully the bravery it had taken to speak up under such scrutiny. The maid felt a warmth in her chest, connection and trust that went beyond the usual relationship between staff and employers. She realized that loyalty, honesty, and courage had created a bond that was stronger than any fear or misunderstanding. Outside, the officers packed their equipment and prepared the police dogs for departure. The dogs, trained to sense tension and uncertainty, had calmed down as the situation resolved. The maid watched them leave, a sense of closure settling over her. Their presence, which had been a source of fear and anxiety, had also been a reminder of the importance of honesty and patience. Each bark, each sniff, each movement had tested her composure, and she had passed the test with steadfast determination. In the hours that followed, the family and the maid began to return to a normal rhythm. Tasks resumed, rooms were cleaned, and meals were prepared. But there was a lightness in the air that had not been there before. The maid felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that her careful attention, loyalty, and courage had contributed to the well-being and safety of the household. She understood that her actions, though small and quiet in daily life, had a profound impact when the right moment arrived as the day progressed. The maid reflected on the lessons she had learned. She realized that fear was a natural response to uncertainty, but it did not have to dictate her actions. By remaining calm, observant, and honest, she had turned a situation filled with suspicion into one of clarity and resolution. She understood that integrity and courage were not measured by recognition or reward, but by the willingness to act rightly even when the outcome was uncertain. The experience had strengthened her confidence and reinforced the value of staying true to oneself. The family, now fully aware of the risks she had taken and the thoughtfulness of her actions, made subtle changes in their appreciation of her work. They involved her more in decisions, sought her advice on household matters, and ensured that her voice was heard. The maid felt a sense of inclusion and respect that had been missing before. Her position in the household was no longer just as a staff member, but as someone trusted, valued, and recognized for her judgment and courage. In the following days, news of the situation reached neighbors and friends. The story was shared carefully, highlighting the maid's honesty and bravery in protecting the family and revealing the truth. People began to see her as more than a quiet figure working in the background. They recognized her integrity, her loyalty, and her ability to act decisively in difficult situations. The maid, however, remained humble. She had not acted for recognition or praise. She had acted because it was the right thing to do. The acknowledgement from others, while appreciated, was secondary to the sense of satisfaction she felt in having done the right thing. The family, the staff, and the maid slowly settled into a peaceful routine. There were no more interruptions, no more tension, and no more uncertainty. The mansion, once a place of anxiety, felt safe and calm again. The maid felt a profound sense of accomplishment, knowing that her careful attention, honesty, and courage had preserved the well-being of those she cared for. She understood that her quiet diligence, her loyalty, and her integrity had tangible power, and she felt a renewed commitment to live by these principles. One afternoon, as the maid worked in the garden, she reflected on how fear and courage had shaped the events of the past days. Fear had been a constant companion, pressing down on her. But it had also forced her to think carefully, act deliberately, and remain observant. Courage had allowed her to speak the truth when it mattered most, to take responsibility for her actions, and to protect the family from harm. The interplay of these forces had transformed a moment of crisis into a story of integrity, resilience, and loyalty.